Hello friends, this is lesson 2 of Brahmo Music. New here? Welcome. Remember, we are working to broaden Brahmo Music together. So subscribe, like, and after this lesson, you'll be free to share. We begin. Our topic of concern today is music notes and rests. Music is made up of a number of symbols, Mathematical expressions and calculations are not also an exception here. It's interesting, very interesting, I tell you. Let's define our terms of interest before we dig deeper and see what exactly we are going to do here. Music notes and rests. The main terms here are notes and rests. So we are going to define the term note and also the term rest. We are saying that a music note is a symbol used for denoting a musical sound. Like the way a national flag in a country or in a state is also used as a symbol of unity. Here we are saying a music note is also a symbol, but it's used in music and its use is for denoting a musical sound. In a musical notation, a note can represent the pitch and also a duration of a sound. It can be sounded for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, anytime, depending on the type of the note that is there. However, the rests correspond to the notes. If a rest has the same name as a note, then that note and the rest have the same length. There is only one difference between a note and a rest, and the difference is here. A rest is a time interval in which a score reader or instrument player is not sounding a note on their instrument or on their voice if they are singing. The thing that you're supposed to understand here is that a note is used for denoting a musical sound, is a symbol. A rest is as well a symbol, used also for denoting a musical sound. But during that time when you are supposed to sound, you keep quiet, you keep silent. That's the meaning of a rest. A rest is exactly like a note, but the difference is for a rest, you keep quiet, you silent. Rests have the same names with their corresponding notes. That is, if a note is sounded for 2 seconds, then its equivalent rest is not sounded for the same time or the same duration of 2 seconds. So that's the difference between notes and rests. It's on that the rests are not sounded and the notes are sounded. Here there is a chart which has the note, symbols of the notes, symbol of the rest, the number of beats each has, and also a measure if you compare it to the whole note. The name there in the first column, the column is from up coming downwards. That's where the name is, whole note. Name, whole, half, quarter, that's the column. And the row is where we have the first line up there before you come to the table. Name, note, rest, beats, and measure. That is the row. We are looking at the notes. The note that is there round, the first one, is called a whole note. The Americans call it a whole note, but it's also called a semi-brief note. And this semi-brief note is the note that has 4 beats. Its rest is there. It's like a box which is touching a line from below. If you can follow the first row, and it has 4 beats. This whole note is the one which is used as a reference point for all the other notes. So if the whole note has 4 beats, and it's because it is called whole, its number is 1. Just whole as 1, something which is 1. The half of this whole note is called half note, or it's called a minim. A minim is the half of the whole note. There you see something looking like a letter D with a space in the below there with a space. That note called half note is also called a minim, and the minim is that name called minim is the most common name that is used. The quarter note, written quarter there, is called a crotchet, and its rest looks like that, and the number of beats that it has is 1 beat, because we refer from the whole note. Whole note has 4 beats. Half of it is called the minim, therefore half of 4 beats is 2 beats. The quarter note is a quarter. If you compare it to the whole note, it's a quarter of the whole note. And if the whole note has 4 beats, therefore you divide by 4 and you get that the quarter note or the crotchet has only 1 beat. We come to the eighth note, which is also called a quaver. The quaver is the eighth of the whole note. So 4 divided by 8, it gives you a half. That's why you have 1/2 there. The 16th beat is called the semiquaver, and the semiquaver is the 16th bit from the whole note. It's like you compare it to the whole note. It's like the whole note divided by 16. So 4 over 16 will give you a quarter, just 1 over 4. And that's a sample of a chart which has notes and rests. We are going to look at more of them so that we get to understand the better. Here we have a chart which has notes, names of notes, and rests. The first column, you're seeing the first thing here is name of note stroke rest. So the note and the rest have the same name. The only difference is the note is sounded and the rest is not sounded. The longest note is called a longer. Some people call it long without the a at the end. So they call it a long note. This long note is 4 times the whole note. 4 times. The whole note has 4 beats. And we are saying that the longer note is 4 times the whole note. So if it's 4 times, it's 4 times 4, which gives you 16 beats. That's why in the last column of the first row you have the 16. The longer you follow it, its value with respect to the whole note is 4, because the whole note is 1. Above 1 is like 1 times 2. It is the breve, which is 2, and the longer is 4. The number of beats is different from the number of the beat. The longer note is called the 4th beat. The breve is called the 2nd beat. The whole note is just whole. Whole means 1. The minim is a half of the whole. The crotchet is a quarter. The quaver is 8th. Semiquaver is 16th. Demisemiquaver is 32nd. And hemi-demisemiquaver is the 64th beat. If you talk about the number of beats that it has, if the whole note has 4 beats, then the breve, which is above it, which is 2 times 8, will have 8 beats. And the longer is 4 times the whole note, it will have 16 beats. Coming from the whole note, coming downwards, there is a minim, which is half of the whole note. So 4 divided by 2 will give you 2 beats. The minim has 2 beats. The crotchet is a quarter note, it has 1 beat. A quaver is half note, is the 8th note, and it has a half beat if you compare it to the whole note. And the semiquaver is the 16th beat, will have a quarter beat. Demisemiquaver is the 32nd note, and it has 8th beat. Hemi-demisemiquaver, which is the 64th, has the number of beats there is 16th beat. I hope you're understanding that. We have the longest note, which we've just looked at. We have just looked at the name, but you have not seen how it looks like. This is the longer note. This is how it looks like. It's like something like a box at the beginning, but it has a tail which is too long. The tail that is long makes it to be called the longer note. So the longer note looks like this, and we're saying that this longer note is the one which has 16 bits, and its value with reference to the whole note is the fourth bit. We can go ahead and look at this other chart. This other chart is displaying the rests and the notes. In the first column there are rests, in the middle there's the name, time, value, and at the end there's the note that is corresponding to the rest. We can look at the first one, the whole note rest. The first one in the first row is the whole note rest, and at the end of it in the right hand side is the note which is corresponding to it. So the time you use to respond or to sound the whole note, if you use 2 seconds to sound the whole note, then you will use the same time, 2 seconds, to keep silent during a rest that is whole. We have below it there is half note. Half note it looks like the whole note, but the difference is the whole note is below the line and the half note is above the line. Mark that difference. The first one is below the line, the whole note is below the line, and the half note is above the line. Half note rest. We can look at the half note. The note itself is called the minim, and that's how it looks like. It looks like a D with a space in the middle. There is a quarter note which we have said is called a crotchet. A crotchet and a quaver look similar, but the difference is the tail. The crotchet does not have any tail. Crotchet note does not have any tail, and the difference between the crotchet note and the crotchet and the minim note is that the crotchet note is shaded in the inside, while the minim note has a space inside. It's not shaded. The minim is the half note, the crotchet is the quarter note, and that's its rest on the left hand side. We are coming to the eighth note, also called a quaver. A quaver is like a crotchet, but it has one tail. That's the note, and its rest looks like the way you are seeing on the left hand side. Below it is the 16th note rest. The 16th note is also called a semiquaver, and a semiquaver, because the half of the quiver is a semiquaver, and a quiver has one tail. Now a semiquaver will have two tails. Semiquaver or the 16th note has two tails. Below a semiquaver or the 16th note, there is something called a demi-semiquaver. Demi-semiquaver, as if we look at them from here, the names are here. We are saying there's a walnut, minim, crotchet, quiver, semiquaver, demi-semiquaver, and hemi-demi-semiquaver. So the same names are applied here. It's on that they have other names, and these other names are the ones which have been used here. Here they have been given the names according to their reference from the walnut. Walnut is one, minim is half note, quarter note is the crotchet, the quiver is head note, the semiquaver is called the 16th note, and now the demi-semiquaver is the 32nd note. After the demi-semiquaver, we have the hemi-demi-semiquaver. Hemi-demi-semiquaver. Look at the last row, the last completely. This hemi-demi-semiquaver. That's how it is written. And this one is called the 64th note. The 64th. You can look at how the note looks on the right hand side and how its rest also looks like. The quiver here, the note which is called the 8th note, if you look at the note, it has a tail which is turning to the right hand side, while its rest has a tail, one tail also, which is turning to the left hand side. We come below it to the 16th note, which is also called the semiquaver. We have two tails. It has two tails which are also facing the right hand side. So all the tails of notes are facing the right hand side, and the tails of the rest are facing the other way around, the left hand side. Get that? We go ahead and look at examples of these notes. We are saying that the one on the right hand side is called the walnut. Walnut. It's like an O, wall, something which is one. A half of it is the one which is in the middle, which is called the half note. We are calling it half note because it's a half of the walnut, but its real name is called the minim. It's like a D, but it's not shaded inside. Then a half of a half. You see the quarter note here, it's a quarter with respect to the walnut, but its real name is called the crotchet. We are calling it a quarter note because it's a quarter of the walnut. We are calling the middle one a half note because it's a half of the walnut. But the names here are walnut is also called the semi-breve. Semi-breve or walnut, minim or half note, and then crotchet or quarter note. Crotchet has one beat, the half note here has two beats, and the walnut has four beats. 4 beats, 2 beats, 1 beat from the right hand coming to the left hand side. We have just looked at the notes, how they are looking like a simple dot, just like that. But now we are going to look at things which are called the dotted notes. These dotted notes, this is where serious mathematics comes, because music is very funny. Music has several concepts. Music is using the knowledge of every other thing, every other subject that you study outside, and it brings them together. Here we are really good to go. Here I want your full attention, because this is where the real mathematics comes. This is where officially mathematics kicks off. Don't be lazy. Music learners are intelligent, and music itself is fun. We can look at the dot, the meaning of a dot or dotted note. There are two types of dotted notes, or the notes have two types of dots. There can be a dot in front of a note. Also, there can be another dot either above or below the note. There are two types of dots. There's a dot which is which can be in front of the note. That's one type of a note. Another one can be found above a note, like this note. You can have a dot in front of it. That's one type of a note. You can of a dotted note. Also, you can have another dot which is above, either above the note or below the note. They both have different meanings. A dot above or below a note means that the first half of the note is sounded while the last half is kept silent. That's the meaning of a dot above, either above or below a note. That's the meaning of that kind of dot. It means that your sound, if the note is supposed to take 2 seconds, you are supposed to sound the first half of that note, and the last half you keep silent. That means if it's useful, if it's supposed to be sounding for 2 seconds, you will sound the first 1 second, and the last second you keep silent. That's the meaning of such a dot, which is found above or below a note. And the second one is a dot in front of a note. This is where we are going to dwell at the moment. We are not going to look at the first dot with the one we are saying it's found above or below a note. We are going to look at this other dot which we are saying is found in front of a note. This kind of a dot means that the note should be added a half of itself to make that note and a half of itself. A dot in front of a note means that the note should be added a half of itself to make that note and a half of itself. If we are using, let's say, a minim, we're saying a minim has 2 bits. Minim has 2 bits, and if a minim has 2 bits, and we are saying a dot in front of a note, means that we add a half value of that note to itself. Since a minim has 2 bits, if we put a dot in front of a minim, it will mean that we shall have a minim, full minim, which has 2 bits, and also another half of a minim. If the minim is 2, so a half of 2 is 1. So we shall have 3 bits in 1. Because the minim itself is 2 bits, and a half of 2 is 1. So we are adding a half of that minim to the minim. So it's like 2 plus a half of 2, which is 1. So it will make 3. That's the meaning of that kind. Here we have sample of dots, such dotted notes, and the first one is called a crochet. A crochet has a dot in front, and the middle one is called a minim. It has a dot in front, and the last one on the right hand side is called the quiver, and it also has a dot in front. The first one here, the crochet with a dot, means that we have a crochet plus a half of it. A half of a crochet is a quiver. So a crochet is 1 bit and a quiver is a half bit. So it will give you 1.5 bits. That's the meaning of the first dotted note here, which is a dotted crochet. The second one is called a dotted minim. A dotted minim itself has 2 bits, as we had just said in the last slide. And here we are seeing a minim. We are seeing a minim which has a dot. Minim having 2 bits plus a half of 2, which is 1. That dot represents a half of a minim. So it has 1 bit. 1 bit plus the 2 bits makes 3 bits. We are good to go. The next one, or the last one, is a quiver, and the quiver having a dot in front means that we are going to add a half of a quiver into that quiver. The quiver has a half bit, and a half of a quiver is called a semi-quiver. Semi-quiver has a quarter bit. So here we are going to have a half plus a quarter. So we shall have 3 quarters of bits. Here there are many of them here. We have seen this. The first one is called a dotted walnut. Well, walnut, a half of a walnut is called a minim. A half of a walnut is a minim. If we have a dotted walnut, it means we have a walnut plus a half of itself. You see there, a dotted walnut equals to a walnut itself plus a minim, because a minim is represented by that dot, which is a half of it. Below it, there is a minim, which is dotted. A dotted minim means that we have a minim itself plus a half of that minim, and the half of a minim is a crochet. That's why we're having the dotted minim equals to a minim plus a crochet. A crochet is a half, and is represented by that dot. The third one is the crochet, dotted crochet. Dotted crochet means that we have a crochet itself plus a half of a crochet, which is a quiver. I think you can see that. And below it, in the last row, we have a dotted quiver. A dotted quiver will give you a quiver itself plus a semi-quiver. You see the semi-quiver has 2 tails. I think you can understand that. On the right hand side, there's the same thing that is that has happened in the left hand side, but the only difference is that on the right hand side, these ones are rests, and the ones on the left hand side that we just looked at are notes. So the left hand side is sounded while the right hand side is kept silent. We can look at the first thing. The first rest there is the walnut rest, or the semi-brief rest. We said the walnut is like faces down. It's attached to a line, which is a line is above it, and the walnut rest is below the line. And the difference between it and the minim is that the minim is above a line while the walnut is below a line. So a walnut rest, which is dotted, means we have a walnut plus a minim. You see a walnut, it faces downwards, plus the minim, which is facing upwards, and the minim rest is a half of the walnut rest. Get that? The next one is the it's just like the left hand side. The only thing that is that the name of this one on the wall on the right hand side is different from the left hand side, because the left hand side is the notes and the right hand side we are seeing there the rests. We have in the second column, in the second row, I mean, there is a minim which is dotted. A dotted minim will give you a minim itself plus a crochet. That thing looking like a Z is a crochet, which is a half of a minim. So we have a minim plus a crochet. On the third one, we have a crochet itself, which is dotted, and it will give us a crochet plus a half of it. A half of a crochet is a minim rest. Of a crochet rest is a minim rest. So we have a crochet rest plus, I mean, a quiver rest. Sorry, it's a quiver rest. A half of a crochet rest is a quiver rest. The last one is we have a quiver rest which is dotted, so it will give us a quiver rest plus a semi quiver rest. I hope you're understanding that. We are going ahead. Here you can look and see that we have 2 bits. The final answer is 2 bits. How are we saying that this is 2 bits? If we look at this one, we look at the last row on the right hand side. There's a quiver rest which is dotted, so it will give us a quiver plus a semi quiver. Here also we have the same kind of rest. Can you see this one? The last row on the right hand side, we have a quiver which is dotted, and here we have a quiver itself. A quiver is a half of a crochet, and the note here, the second note, we have a quiver rest and a note which is dotted. So the first of all, a quiver rest has a half beat. Quiver rest has a half beat, and the crochet that is there has 1 beat. Because of the dot which is in front of it, so it will have that 1 beat plus a half, so it will have 1.5 beats. But we said that the first beat here, the first rest here, which is called a quiver rest, is also having a half beat. So a half beat plus 1 beat is 1.5, plus a half which is represented by this dot, it will give another half. So 1.5 plus a half will give you 2 bits. That's why we are having there the final answer is 2 bits. The same thing we have just seen there. The minim, a dotted minim gives us a minim itself plus a half of itself, which is a crochet. And a crochet which is also dotted will give us a crochet itself plus a half of a crochet, which is the quiver. A crochet which is dotted twice. Understand this. The first dot means that we add a half of the knot which is behind it. The first dot refers to a half of a crochet. The second dot refers to a half of the first dot. Get something. The first dot, the dot in front of a knot means a half of that knot. But if you find there are 2 dots in front of a knot, sorry, the first dot means that we add a half of the value of that knot to that knot. A half of the value. That's the meaning of the first dot. But the second dot means that we add a half of the value of the first dot. So here, having the crochet as the knot here, we shall have a crochet itself plus the first dot represents a half of a crochet, which is a quiver having 1 tail, and the second dot means we add a half of the dot, and we have found that the first dot represents the quiver, so the second dot will have a half of the quiver, which will now be the semi quiver having the 2 tails. I'm sure you're understanding that. We have been looking at a walnut, also called a semi-breve, and we have looked at what's above the walnut. The walnut is also called a semi-breve, and above the walnut there is a knot called breve, so that we have the semi-breve below it, and above the breve there is a longer knot. So we are beginning from the longer knot, the breve, and the semi-breve, which is also called the walnut. But before we reach to the walnut, which is a semi-breve, we have a knot which is called a breve, and this knot called a breve looks like this. We found that a walnut is like a circle, or it's like an O. The difference between a walnut and a breve knot is that a breve knot has some lines on the either side, that's on the right hand side and on the left hand side. After drawing the O, you put some straight lines on each sides. That's how a breve looks like. And when you want to turn it into a semi-breve, we remove, or the walnut, we remove the sides, those lines on the side. It gives us a breve itself. And before we end it, because we are looking at notes, everything that we are looking today is just notes, how notes looks like, how notes are added, some half values, how they are halved. some mathematics of notes. Here is how to draw a brief rest. And this whole diagram has something called a staff in it, and we said earlier that a staff is 5 parallel lines. 5 parallel lines. Here we have 5 parallel lines, and we have on the left hand side we shall define which things are there. On the left hand side there is a clef. This kind of clef, can you guess what it is? Because in the last lesson 1, we are learning about clefs, and we saw what this one means. This one is called an F clef. F clef. And we said for an F clef, the line given the name F is the 4th line. And we had also said that lines are given numbers from below. That's the lower line is called line 1. The second line, which is touched by the arrows, if you can see the arrows of the whole rest and the brief rest, those arrows are touching the second line. That line is called line 2. And above that line, the next line there is called line 3. 4 and 5 is the topmost line. So after the F clef, we have known that the line in the middle of the colon after the F clef is called the line F. We see the next symbol there, 4-2. 4-2 is a time signature. We have not yet reached there, but we'll come and see that. After the 4-2, which is time signature, we are seeing something like an O, and we have just said that this O is a whole note. It's not called an O, but a whole note, or a semi-brief note, sorry. That's how it looks like. That's how its note looks like. But the arrow, the first arrow, is pointing to the whole note rest, the rest of a whole note. The whole note is like this, is like an O, but the whole rest is like a box which is attached to a line from below. A brief rest is twice the whole rest, so it will touch both lines. It will be found in the middle of 2 parallel lines or 2 adjacent lines. That's how a brief rest looks like. We are good to go, and since you have seen all those kinds of things, and we have seen the types of notes, we have seen the names of notes, as even you can see in this chart here, we are seeing that in the first column and the first row also, we are seeing that there are symbols on the first column. The second column, there are names. The third column, there are also some kind of names. The fourth column has numbers, and the last one has how the rest are drawn in a staff. The first one, there is a brief note. It is drawn like that, the way we have just seen behind there, and below it there is a semi-brief, which is like an O. This semi-brief is the one which is called a whole note. A whole note is also called a semi-brief, and it has 4 beats. The brief above there has 8 beats. A dotted minim, we have seen it's a dotted minim, but it's not a minim, it's a dotted minim. A minim itself has 2 beats, and the dot represents a half of 2 bits, so it will be 1. 1 plus 2 gives 3 bits. That's why we have 3 there. After that, we have a minim. Minim itself is 2 bits, and we have 2 bits already there. Below the minim, there we have a quarter note, which is called a crotchet. It has 1 bit. 1 bit. A quiver is a half of a crotchet. If a crotchet has 1 bit, therefore the quiver will definitely have a half bit. We have a semi-quiver, which is a half of a quiver. Quiver is half bit, and the semi-quiver will be a half of a half. A half of a half is a half times a half, which is a quarter bit. We have a demi-semiquiver. A demi-semiquiver is a half of a semiquiver. If a semiquiver is a quarter, a half of a quarter is 1/8, 1/8. We also have a hemi-demi-semiquiver, which is supposed to be below there, but for now it's not there. I wish to thank you so much. I'm very delighted that you have journeyed with me since the beginning of this lesson 2, and I'm happy. I'm so much happy. Before we just end it there, I would like you to know that this is Bramo Music. I would like to invite you with your friends whom you are going to share that we have this Bramo Music here. This is where we are coming to learn, to add our knowledge, or to gain new knowledge if we didn't know anything about music. And in the lesson that we are going to have, that's the third lesson. It will be called lesson 3. That lesson will feature a grand staff and time signature. Grand staff and the time signature. So you can go and find out what a grand staff is, what a time signature is, and then we can come and